just makes you sound a little very crazy.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you are not going to like this if you have grown up watching Masters of the Universe. As excited as I have been about the new live-action movie, the box office reports are disappointing enough to raise serious doubts about a sequel. Yes, it breaks my heart to say this, but Masters of the Universe 2 might not be happening. This could have been a major revival for the franchise, and it was a big deal because He-Man was back to the big screen for the first time in 40 years. However, the reality is harsh, and the truth is that it has been completely overrun by a relatively low-budget horror comedy, the newly released Scary Movie. The reviews for Masters of the Universe also haven't been too encouraging, and without a serious turnaround, the future looks rather bleak. In this video, I will take you through the entire scenario of why the sequel seems like a distant dream right now, and why the franchise has endured such a long history of failures.
You are he who will restore peace to Eternia.
Skeletor took my family.
What is the new Masters of the Universe movie all about? I was thrilled about the Masters of the Universe live-action movie even before its theatrical release on June 5th, 2026. The trailers were promising, and the nostalgia factor probably made me extra biased. But this was a massive project distributed by big names like Amazon MGM and Sony Pictures. The director Travis Knight was no newbie, and he has previously worked in films like Bumblebee, which made me think that he would do justice to the project. Honestly, I wasn't really disappointed when I watched the film in the theaters. It was a solid entertainer that told the story of Adam stuck on Earth after Skeletor overran Eternia with his evil forces. Adam was sent away with the Power Sword, and after spending 15 years away from home, he was finally back to deliver justice. What followed next was an intense struggle of Adam and his allies, and of course, he could summon the powers of Castle Grayskull with the Power Sword and turn into the mighty He-Man. The story was basic, but it didn't fail to entertain because of some solid performances from Nicholas Galitzine as Prince Adam, Jared Leto as Skeletor, and Idris Elba as Man-at-Arms. The movie didn't just end with the defeat of Skeletor, but a couple of post-credit scenes made the intentions clear. The makers had plans for a sequel, and they probably still do if the external circumstances fall in place, which I am coming to later in this video. In short, the movie was a big deal for the fans because it had the potential to capitalize on the mass nostalgia of the fans. Let's not forget that this is only the second live-action Masters of the Universe film ever, and the first one was 4 decades ago in 1987, featuring Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. And guess what? That one was a commercial failure as well, and it is almost like the curse is refusing to let go. The budget and break-even problem. So it is time to address the elephant in the room, and I will mince words here because box office figures don't lie. But first, let me tell you a little something about how the Hollywood break-even rule works. Basically, Hollywood uses a 2.5 times multiplier on the production budget to calculate the break-even point, and this accounts for all the costs for marketing, distribution, and theater cuts. Now, Masters of the Universe was a big budget venture, and reports from Variety and Deadline put the production budget alone at $170 million officially. In fact, some sources even suggest a higher budget of around $200 million, but even the official figure is huge. So going by simple math, the movie needs to make roughly $425 million globally just to break even. There have been reports indicating that the real figure to break even is even higher, at $500 to $600 million because of the massive marketing spend. This is where disaster struck. Even before the release, the early bookings were not looking good enough. Finally, the opening weekend results were out, and they looked like a financial disaster. The movie made only about $29.3 million in the domestic market, and $25 million in the international market, with a total collection of $54.3 million worldwide. Box Office Mojo currently tracks the domestic total at just $11.75 million, as the film seems to drop off rapidly. As I do the math, I see a dead end because unless there is a miraculous revival, the movie will fall way short of the break-even figure of $425 million. In short, it will be a major flop. And such box office disasters usually don't get a sequel, do they? The bad reviews and audience reaction. Why the movie tanked? When I think of how cinema has evolved over the years, I realize the increasing role of social media and word of mouth behind the success of modern day hits. Well, that is exactly where Masters of the Universe has faltered. While many reviewers were positive and optimistic about the narrative, and fanboys like me celebrated the comeback to the big screen, there were some tough words from some prominent critics. For instance, The Guardian called it a weak, big-budget misfire and a $200 million budget wasted of everyone's time. Now that is outright harsh, but if I am completely unbiased, I have to admit that the critics were not entirely unfair. The 143-minute runtime was more bloated and dragged than it needed to be, and this really affected the flow of the story. Another major flaw pointed out by many was that the film has a confused tone because it tries to be both serious and self-mocking, and the balance between action and humor doesn't add up. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the harshest criticism was reserved for the lack of real chemistry between the leads. Don't get me wrong, they are all fine actors, and Idris Elba is a freaking legend, but something doesn't sync between them and it reflects in the performance. You might not notice it during your first watch if you are a blind fan, but it is evident for the others. It is hard to deny that the movie tries to lean too hard on the nostalgia factor, and somehow even that doesn't work in its favor. As Austin Culture Map points out, the film leans on nostalgia and falls flat, and it is a cynical attempt at exploiting a certain group's nostalgia without putting any effort into actually making a good movie. You know what is actually the saving grace for the film? It is the hardened fans like us, but as it turns out, we are not big enough a number to make it a commercial hit. What I find particularly ironic is that a $200 billion blockbuster got derailed by low-budget horror films like Scary Movie and Backrooms, both of which have been hits. Scary Movie might have its legacy, but it is still a slasher spoof, and it has already made over $55 million against a meager $29.3 million from Masters of the Universe. Of course, the investment is 10 times lesser for Scary Movie, which makes it the leader in terms of profits. When Masters of the Universe came in at number 2 on opening weekend behind Scary Movie, I knew that the writing was on the wall. If this is not a deeply concerning sign for the future of the franchise, I don't know what is. The cursed history of the franchise. I don't mean the word cursed lightly here. I mean the history of Masters of the Universe movie attempts is riddled with such an extensive development hell and failures that it almost seems unreal. Let me take you back to the year 2009 because it is important in the context why this keeps happening to the franchise that has such a loyal fan base. The He-Man live-action movie, officially titled Masters of the Universe, entered the development phase back in 2009. Initially, Richard Wenk was hired for a rewrite in 2012, and then John M. Chu from the G.I. Joe Retaliation Glory was attached as the director in 2013. But even he dropped out, and what followed was a long line of changes from directors like Aaron and Adam Nee to actors like Noah Centineo, who was cast and then left the role. I think the most disappointing bit was a full concept design that was completed in 2015 by a team and got cancelled even though the script was described as absolutely badass. By now, a decade had passed and Sony gave up on the project after struggling to finance it. The rights were transferred to Netflix in 2022, and this time Kyle Allen was cast as He-Man. But this too was slated for another cancellation in July 2023, due to budgetary concerns exceeding $200 million. Eventually, in 2024, Amazon MGM Studios acquired the rights officially and announced Travis Knight as director, and the movie was finally filmed and released after 15 years of abrupt changes, cancellations, and change of hands. All this time and the product still couldn't land. I would say this is a clear indication of a project that Hollywood refuses to let go of, even though the audience refuses to embrace it. And to be fair, when you make people wait for 15 years, they do lose interest. Will Masters of the Universe 2 ever happen? The verdict. If I asked you to place a bet after revealing the numbers at the box office, would you bet on a sequel? Well, then you have the answer already, and I wouldn't give you any false hopes. At the current trajectory, the movie is heading toward a massive financial loss, and experts are predicting a loss in excess of hundreds of millions. The poor reviews and a generally negative word of mouth wouldn't help the collections in the second and third weekends, and things are only set to go downhill from here. We have seen the 1987 live-action film fail before, and it took the makers nearly 4 decades to attempt a serious revival. Maybe it is time for someone to accept that the franchise doesn't have blockbuster appeal. This is not the case for the Netflix animated reboots, but the theatrical figures tell a different story altogether. Naturally, Amazon has not committed to a sequel at this point, and as The Guardian pointed out, the film carries a world being constructed for a franchise that is unlikely to see a revival. But I always try to look for a silver lining, and as a hopeful fan, let me give you the best possible scenario as well. So Masters of the Universe is doing relatively well at the international market, and if the collections pick up speed in Europe and Latin America, maybe it can claw back some of the lost ground. Also, it is worth considering that Amazon is a massive organization, and it can absorb the loss and still greenlight a sequel if they see the potential. What's more, the sequel can be available as a streaming exclusive on Paramount Video instead of a theatrical release, which would lower the financial stakes considerably. And I almost forgot about Mattel, the toy line that has a vested interest in keeping the franchise alive. And while the chances are negligible, they aren't nil. If you are a fan, keep your fingers crossed and hope for a miracle. I would love to hear your take on the matter in the comments below. Do you think that the movie deserves a sequel, or do you want this to be a one-off forgotten film from a franchise that doesn't have the potential to make it to the big screen? If you appreciate the efforts to bring you this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos.